So in today's webcast, I'm going to give you a brief overview of EMVCo and EMV, and we're really going to be focusing today on the newer things that EMVCo is doing: payment tokenization 2.0, EMV 3D secure testing, QR code specifications, and the EMVCo remote commerce work. And then we'll wrap it up with some information on how you can engage more with EMVCo. So let's start off by looking at EMVCo's role in secure payments. If you consider the elements of a secure purchase transaction, there's some form of purchase verification, there's some form of payment device authentication, there has to be a secure exchange of data between the payment devices and the acceptance devices, whether that's a merchant terminal, whether it's going directly to a merchant server. And then, of course, there has to be some authorization of the transaction and eventually a settlement of the transaction. And also, there's an element for online transactions of some element of online cardholder verification. So all of these component pieces exist for a secure purchase transaction. Traditionally, EMVCo's role was just around the EMV chip. Our focus was on the secure exchange of data between the payment card and the merchant terminal. However, as the payment space evolved, so has EMVCo. But EMVCo's remit is now much more than just the chip interacting with the chip terminal. EMVCo has specifications that cover contact chip, contactless chip, payment tokenization, EMV 3D secure, requirements for the user interface on cell phones, QR code. And we also are always working on new initiatives, such as software-based mobile payment security requirements, secure remote commerce, and looking forward to the second generation of EMV transactions. So I've been talking about what EMVCo does. I'd like to focus for a second on some of the things that EMVCo does not do, and this is occasionally a point of confusion in the industry. So EMVCo's role is to create and publish EMV specifications. It's not to come up with the product development or the implementation of products based on those certifications. EMVCo is not involved in any creation of mandates or any creation of compliance programs to those mandates. EMVCo has no engagement in the development of commercial incentives or interchange rates that may be related to the use of EMV transactions. And EMVCo has no involvement of the creation of any fraud liability shift. All of these business implementation issues are all managed either by the global, regional, or the domestic payment networks. So EMVCo has a critical role in the payments industry, but it is still a very narrow role. If you think about all of the component pieces that have to come into play and operate effectively for a global interoperable payments environment, there are multiple bodies who are involved. EMVCo does its specification work, but we do it based on platforms that are created by other global industries. And then riding on top of those specifications are the actual requirements that are needed for the implementation of these policies. All right, so let's dive in a little bit to the EMV payment tokenization space. So payment tokenization, the payment tokenization is the concept of using a token that complies with the primary account number format, and it supports interoperability within the existing payments ecosystem. And because it's within the existing payments ecosystem, that facilitates widespread adoption. And the business opportunity, well, it's to replace the primary account number with a payment token, and that's going to minimize the fraud exposure if there's a data compromise. And we want to ensure the continued integrity in the ecosystem by maintaining those same attributes of the PAN, because if the payment token has the same attributes of the PAN, it can effectively and efficiently ride the existing rails that exist today that support global payment processing. And one of the other great things about the EMV payment tokenization is that it's not just specific to point of sale. The concept of payment tokenization is applicable to the electronic commerce space as well. EMVCo's role, again, as our role is with all things, it's to provide a toolkit. We provide the specifications, we provide the framework that allow others to go ahead and build out solutions related to payment tokenization. Now, the technical framework that accommodates these roles also defines specifically the payment service, the token service provider, the token requester, the token user, all of the roles necessary to implement a payment tokenization solution. It creates the considerations that are necessary to implement a program, but this is an important distinction. We don't actually set the business policies or processes, but we do define what are the elements that would be necessary to successfully implement a payment tokenization model. We do provide, however, a registration service, and the primary purpose of this is to make sure that two entities aren't eventually using the same payment token, which of course would be problematic and result in conflict and clashes as transactions are being processed. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on payment tokenization. There's certainly a wealth of material on our website, but I do just want to clarify again a point of confusion in the industry. The term tokenization is used pretty widely, and the term tokenization really can refer to replacing any value with another value, another token. And in the payment space, there are certainly, and have been for many years, tokenization solutions in place that replace the live account number with a token. The big difference, however, between these, what I would refer to as closed loop or localized localized tokenization solutions, is that they're not interoperable across the global payment rails. And that's the difference. The implementation of an EMV payment token means that that token value can actually transfer across the full life cycle of the payment transaction, through the acquiring processes, through the networks, through the issuing processes, and on the way onto the issuer. So I said this presentation was about some of the newer things. So what I'm going to talk about now is what's in version 2.0 of EMV's payment tokenization. So I'd like to talk about some of the key differences between the first version of the payment tokenization spec released back in 2014 and the current version of the specification. We got a lot of feedback from the industry. We worked very closely with our associates, but we also got broad feedback from the entire payments ecosystem. And taking that feedback into consideration, we made revisions and clarifications in version 2.0. So, you told us that we need to ensure interoperability and security of multiple token service providers in the payments ecosystem. And we made sure that we clarified that, yes, the framework accommodates a token program which defines policies and processes for TSPs and token requesters. You told us that the token assurance level, a concept in the first version of the spec, really wasn't meeting the need when it came to implementation. So we retooled that, and now it's the token assurance method that categorizes the ID and V method categories with factual values. You told us that the use cases needed to be updated more frequently. We went back and we restructured the specification. We tried to distinguish the specification framework from its potential use cases. And we're also looking at developing a standalone use case document that would be easier for us to update more frequently. You told us that the type of token requester could be a useful decision point for card issuers, and so that we created a structure to define the token requester types. You told us that payment token management updates to the token lifecycle need to consider the possibility that maybe the merchant never knew the original PAN. So we've created a process whereby token requests using a payment token or a token reference ID and payment token lifecycle event management clarifications can be accommodated. You told us that e-commerce guest checkout, inter-channel fraud, and recurring split transactions need to be better supported. So we've made enhancements to accommodate those environments. You told us that additional detail and clarity was needed on token processing for data requirements. We've added clarity in that area. And of course, the payment account reference, which was a separate spec bulletin, needed to be incorporated into the new version of the spec, and we've done that. So that was just a very brief overview on payment tokenization. There's a wealth of material on our website, and I would encourage you to look more deeply into the area. But let's move on with a quick update on what's happening in the EMV 3D Secure space. So what is 3D Secure? Well, 3DS provides a secure communication channel between the cardholder, the merchant, and the issuer. And what it is it's a means of securely identifying the cardholder in an online transaction. And it's actually a messaging protocol which enables the issuers to authenticate their cardholder before the transaction authorization. Now, this is a significant opportunity in the electronic commerce space, because as we all know, remote commerce is a growing segment. Depending on which statistics you look at, not only is e-commerce growing, but more than a quarter of e-commerce transactions are now done on mobile phones. So it's growing both in terms of volume and in terms of the devices that are used. Now, in this environment, the merchant almost always carries the fraud liability. And that's clearly a big factor to be considered. And there are solutions in place. There is 3DS 1.0 that's currently in place. And while it's effective in combating fraud, there's also a high degree of friction incorporated into the transaction. And that's something that we wanted to address in 2.0. So what's EMVCo's role? Well, again, it's to create a specification that supports secure electronic commerce transactions in a globally interoperable manner. Same core role that we have for all of our spec work. Our role is to enhance and maintain the spec. And in the 3DS space, our role is to also provide a testing and approval process to confirm global interoperability of solutions that are being implemented. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit more. It's the 3DS messaging protocol, and it enables issuers to authenticate consumers during online shopping. Why is it 3DS? Well, the three domains are the merchant, the acquirer domain, the interoperability domain, and then the issuer domain. And as I mentioned before, EMVCo is not involved in setting business policy and chargeback rules, but the global networks in general have seen the value. The issuers have seen the value in having a 3DS authentication performed, and usually they're offering fraud chargeback protection to any participants in that system. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on 3DS 1.0. Again, there's or 2.0. In fact, there's a lot of material about 2.0 on our website. But there is one point that I want to highlight just in this overview. The goal of the 3DS 2.0 model is to create an environment where a data-rich information share can happen during the authentication. And with all of this rich data, the issuer can make an approval decision on that authentication, can authenticate the cardholder without the cardholder having to do anything. And this is a critical difference to many of the implementations in place today that require some form of challenge response. And that's where the friction comes into the transaction. And this slide that's on the screen right now just shows you that without any privacy concerns, clearly any implementation has to be consistent with the privacy requirements of any country. But there's a lot of rich data that's now available to an issuer. And the 3DS solution can provide this rich data to help the issuer make that decision. And our expectation is, with all of this rich data, the issuers are going to be able to authenticate the cardholder, and no more than maybe 1 in 5 times is the cardholder actually going to have to do some second step, like responding to a text code or some SMS message. So in the 3DS secure testing space, what is coming, what is new for 2018, is the fact that we'll be rolling out a testing model. So the specification was released in 2017. EMVCo has been working diligently on coming up with a testing environment so that that can enable the rollout of solutions, and anyone who's currently building solutions based on the version 2.1.0 of our 3D Secure protocol will be able to get that solution tested. And we're pushing very hard to have our testing facility up and available in 2018. The other point I'd like to make about EMV 3D Secure is that EMVCo's focus really is on the core functionality of secure payment transactions. And it's an important distinction. EMVCo's core focus is to make sure that secure transactions really are globally interoperable. They can work. What we don't have as our core responsibility is the protection of data at rest, securing data. And that securing data role has always been with the PCI Security Standards Council. And that same division of responsibility will exist in the 3D Secure space, where we're coordinating with PCI SSC, who are going to be releasing their own standards for data protection related to 3DS, also coming out in 2018. So, what else is new that EMVCo has been working on? I'd like to talk about QR code-based payment. So, what are we talking about in the QR code payment? Well, QR codes, they're those two-dimensional matrix barcodes that you've seen in many uses. I'm sure anyone who's boarded a flight has seen a QR code at work. QR code-based payment literally is taking that barcode and using the barcode format to incorporate payment data. And the QR code, there's two options. It might be displayed on your phone, a device owned by the consumer, or it actually might be displayed by the merchant and read by the consumer device. What's the opportunity here? QR code payment is a fact of life. It's been rolled out in widespread but still closed loop solutions in different countries around the world. EMVCo's role in this space, as it is consistently, is to bring global interoperability to payment solutions. In terms of infrastructure, many merchants already have scanners sitting there on their counter, able to scan a QR code. And it gives another potential use for the mobile device that's in most people's wallets, most people's pockets. And what's EMVCo's role? Well, EMVCo's role is to create a common QR code format supporting multiple payment systems. And we want to develop specifications and testing environment that can support this interoperable format for QR code. We want to provide an option for increased security by including EMV chip data in the QR code data, particularly in the consumer presented mode. And we want to provide an interoperable platform for the merchant presented data. So I've been talking about two different modes. Let's dig into those a little bit. First, let's talk about the consumer presented mode. So in an EMV consumer presented mode, the consumer's making a purchase. You come up, you identify the merchandise you want, and then you activate an application. So you're going to use credentials associated with your EMV card that have been previously provisioned onto the device. And you select the QR option for payment within the mobile application, and then your phone's going to display a QR code. And then you're going to have that QR code scanned by the cashier, and then the scanning of that QR code is effectively the same as the reading of a card. And so now the merchant has the EMV chip data extract, and that information is then going to be sent through normal authorization and eventually clearing, as it would be for an EMV chip card. Now, the other model, the merchant presented mode, is somewhat different. In a merchant presented mode, the payment transaction enables the consumers to make purchases, and they're going to be using a merchant generated and displayed QR code based on the merchant's details. Now, this QR code might be a static set of data from the merchant, or it might be dynamically generated and include information about the merchant and also include information about the transaction. But either way, the consumer is going to use the QR code reader on their phone. They're going to capture that information and securely using the payment application that's already on their phone. That information is going to be sent back. The issuer is going to authorize the transaction. And then the merchant is going to receive a message saying, yes, transaction outcome positive, and the merchant provides the goods to the consumer. So those are the two core models, and EMV has released specifications that accommodate both models. Those specifications are in the marketplace now. And what we're doing in this environment, it's actually a fairly straightforward process for evaluation as to whether or not your devices are supporting these specifications correctly. So we're actually going to be using a self-evaluation platform. EMVCo will be providing the material. Either the merchants or the issuers will be using that material, and then they'll be self-certifying that they are actually able to meet the transaction requirements. And then, of course, there'll be the normal certification processes that would need to happen for the acceptance of any brands. And that process will still happen, but EMVCo's role will be to provide this self-certification element related to the ability to correctly scan the QR codes and transmit the payment data. Okay, now let's talk about literally one of the newest areas that EMVCo is working on, the area of secure remote commerce. So secure remote commerce, what is it? Well, it's a broad term, but really what we're talking about here is an evolution of remote commerce, electronic commerce, however you want to define it, that enables secure and interoperable payment acceptance from the browser or from phone applications. And it's going to enable a merchant or their agent to receive a payment payload containing data required to process an e-commerce transaction, which can include dynamic data. It's an important distinction. The scope here is, we're looking at remote commerce. So we're looking at situations where there's going to be no physical or proximity-based transaction between the payment device and the acceptance device. What's the opportunity? Well, the introduction of dynamic data, such as an EMV cryptogram, for example, into an e-commerce transaction has the potential to significantly increase security. Today, while there are a lot of different solutions in the market, there's really no interoperable card payment specifications that exist for web-based card payments, particularly that incorporate dynamic data. And a common interoperable spec for the transmission of payment data really has the potential to simplify integration for merchants and commerce platforms to facilitate more secure methods of remote payments. And this is an important point. Yeah, there are a lot of solutions in the marketplace. They're all different. They're all unique. EMVCo wants to bring to the table the ability to simplify integration by adding specifications to this environment. And we want to create specs that really provide interoperable interfaces for merchants, wallet providers, and other stakeholders to optimize development. And we want to provide a common data definition and methodology to exchange a secure payment payload. So I'm using these terms. If we look at the general ecosystem of a secure remote commerce environment, clearly you've got the card holder. They're interacting with some form of merchant platform. When it comes time for payment, Today, there has to be a card selection process, or maybe it's a wallet selection process. Ideally, you want there to be some form of consumer verification happening as part of the transaction. And then, of course, you want a secure payload being transmitted. So you want to be able to securely protect the payment information, and you still want to be able to support as much as possible frictionless electronic commerce. Now, if you compare the two environments, the challenge, and then we look at the EMV chip-based environment and the e-commerce environment, and then what does secure remote commerce represent? Well, clearly, as I mentioned, we're dealing, from a consumer point of view, we're dealing with a card not present environment, consumer not present environment. Channel security, EMV chip has the EMV-based cryptogram. E-commerce, we really don't have a standard approach. With secure remote commerce, we're looking at incorporating dynamic data, and potentially cryptograms. Cardholder verification, we have CVM, cardholder device, CVM, cardholder verification methods available to us. E-commerce, we do have some account verification available to us. In the secure remote commerce environment, we want to see how we can more effectively leverage the consumer credential, the CDCVM, and payment authentication. When it comes to protecting the payment credential, in EMV, very securely protected with the EMV-based with chip and terminal. E-commerce, not really. Payment credentials, very much static data. In the secure remote commerce environment, we want secure transmission of payment payload. We want the primary account number not being available to vulnerable system components. And device validity. We have point of sale supporting EMV, not really any standard device approach in the e-commerce world. We want to be able to incorporate device ID from the consumer device as part of the device validity process in the SRC world. So the secure remote commerce technical framework, it's the foundation, which includes broad concepts and considerations for the establishment of a program. The technical framework is going to describe the roles and the functions for the stakeholders who participate in a secure remote commerce program. So that's the first step. What we're working towards is coming up with a secure remote commerce protocol and core specification. And that's going to be an extension of the technical framework, and it's going to provide functional and security requirements for the whole ecosystem. And the spec is also going to include requirements and data definitions for specific use cases. So the SRC technical framework and specification, it can be adopted to meet the unique payment ecosystem requirements of international, regional, national, or local implementations. And where are we on this work effort? Well, we've published the Secure Remote Commerce Technical Framework. It's out there and available. I recommend that you go take a look at it. But what we're working on in 2018 is taking those concepts in the framework and refining them and developing them in conjunction with the industry, in conjunction with our technical associates and our subscribers, to come up with an implementable specification. So throughout this presentation, I've mentioned working with our associates, our subscribers, engaging with the industry. So I'd just like to finish up with a couple of comments about how EMVCo does engage with the industry to create our specifications. So our core point of contact are our EMVCo associates. Our EMVCo associates are companies who've chosen to actively engage with us, and we interact with them on a regular basis, both for new specifications and for enhancements to our existing specifications. And becoming an EMVCo associate as a company, well, it gives you access to engage with all of the EMVCo representatives. It gives you insight to learn about what we're working on. It gives you influence. I mean, the way that EMVCo decides what our next specification will be is we sit down. We sit down with our associates and we have roadmap discussions. We ask them what they think needs to happen? Where's the opportunity for global specifications? And that's how we come up with our roadmap. And then, of course, it gives you foresight. If you're engaging with us, you know what's on our roadmap, you know what's coming, and you know what the global payments industry thinks is needed for the future. Now, our business associate base is very broad, it's very global, and we have two classes of associates. Business associates are companies who have some direct involvement in the processing of an EMV transaction. They tend to be the merchants, the banks, the transaction processors, the domestic networks. And then we have another class of engagement, the technical associates. And these tend to be the industry suppliers who are building the solutions based on the specifications. But because the technical associates are very involved with how the spec gets developed, many of our business associates elect to operate in both capacities and also work with us, both not only in determining what we're going to work on, which is the area of the business associates and our board of advisors, but also how we're going to do it, which is more the focus of the technical associate work. So, as I mentioned earlier, that's just a very brief overview of what EMVCo is working on. There's a wealth of material on our website that goes into much greater depth on these initiatives and, of course, all of the other initiatives that EMVCo is covering. So I would encourage you to, if you're not already an associate or an EMVCo subscriber, I'd encourage you to become one. If you're interested in any particular aspect of our work, I would strongly encourage you to go to our website and look into it further. With that, thank you very much for your time.